The Museum of Women's History is quite unique, as you already have been told. It was opened on November 22nd, 2014, so it's been up and running only for a couple of months now. What you're looking at on the screen behind me is our website. It's both in Swedish and in English. And at the far end, you can also, in the center of the picture, you can see one of our exhibition rooms. This is a design that was produced during the production of one of our first exhibitions. And the picture that you can see, that woman, she's a very famous feministic icon. This is Emmeline Pankhurst. She was photographed outside the Buckingham Palace in 1914. That is more or less 100 years ago. And the title of that exhibition text says, "The Scream." She's screaming, and that is the 19th century screaming out to us. And I would like to add here and now a quote from the author Ken Follett, who very recently finished the Century Trilogy about the history of the 20th century. And he said, "I would say feminism is the influence that has changed the world more than anything else. More than warfare, more than technical advances. The fact that for 10,000 years, women were subordinate to men, and everybody accepted that. And suddenly, in my lifetime, it completely changed." Very recently in Sweden, there was a survey of history books used in schools. And we all know that Sweden, as all of the Nordic countries, is very highly ranked on a scale of gender equality. This newspaper found, after checking out all these books, counting the people that were mentioned by name in these history books, that only 13% of these people were women. And this was a baffling result. This was very surprising and very disappointing from a gender equality standard. And the pupils that were interviewed in the article in the newspaper, they commented on this, and they said, one boy said, "Well, it seems like the boys did all the fun. They did all the things out there, while the girls were at home cooking." And a girl said, "Well, some might think that no wonder women have a lower salary, since they didn't achieve anything in history." And that is actually true. You can check out any history book. What you can see behind me now is a picture from one of our exhibitions. This exhibition tries to answer the question, why are there so few women in traditional historiography, traditional history? This is a very special kind of exhibition. It's a forest, an enchanted forest, a dreamlike forest, where you walk through the ages and the animals of the forest speak to you. This exhibition is going to be on display for 2 years. But first, I'd like to take you to a different kind of forest, and let's focus on the path. I would like to introduce a term that sometimes or usually is used in physics and social sciences. It's called path dependence. And I looked it up on the Wikipedia to get the right explanation of this term. And this is what Wikipedia says. Path dependence explains how the set of decisions one faces for any given circumstance is limited by the decision one has made in the past, even though past circumstances may no longer be relevant. In common usage, the phrase implies history matters. What is this? Is this lack of creativity? Is it thinking inside the box? Well, maybe, but it's also a description of us as human beings. Human beings are storytelling animals. We need stories to make sense of the world, to understand it. And traditional history has also been referred to by some historians as male genealogy. That is a long row of actions made by men. It's about war and politics, about discoveries, about science, about philosophers, about ideas. All men's actions. Now, let's turn for a little while to the past, to the 1800s. This was an epoch of major social and economic differences, of disease, industrialization, production, capitalism, commercialism, colonialism. A grown-up woman was considered a minor, just like in the Middle Ages. She had a man to decide over her. It could be a husband, a male relative, a brother. Ideas and concepts of this epoch said that she was fragile. A woman's body was fragile. She was to be protected. There were ideas of her soul. She was not fit for intellectual work of any kind. Never ever before, never ever earlier in history has women as a group been quite so powerless as during the 1800s. These were the ones that held the power. These were the ones who made history, who wrote history, who picked out the stories to define history with a capital H. And they are all men, as you can see, but they are not just any men. They are middle-aged men, they are white men, Christian men, and they are also fairly well off. These are the history books that were produced during this epoch, the 1800s and the early 1900s. They are connected, all of these history books are connected to the birth of nations. Nations that were built upon an idea of consensus and unity. It was during this particular time that history was connected to war and politics. And it was also during this process that all of those experiences, actions, knowledge, all of those terms and all of those recollections that belong to women as a group were actually actively chosen not to be included. This was during this epoch that women were forgotten, swept into oblivion. This is history of the 21st century. It was published just very recently. I think this is a cover from 2013. It's all about history. All about history. And you can see that the 1800s is staring us right in the face. Still. Isn't this path dependence? Isn't this the 1800s? Even today, we recreate and multiply notions and ideas belonging to past times. We assume that men have always been in power, since they were in power during the industrialization and the urbanization of the 1800s and early 1900s. We still keep this picture and image. I googled history films 2014, and you see what comes out. I think that picture speaks very much for itself. So feminism and all those social changes that was a consequence of the upheavals and changes during the 20th century has made no impact on how we look at history, how we look at women and men of the past. It's like we live in a time bubble that has been created a long time ago. To us as a museum, the Museum of Women's History, as we see it, we have to offer a different standpoint, a different point of view. Because today, as we stand here, us people of the 21st century, we have different values. We don't have the values of the 1800s anymore, as the Declaration of Human Rights tells us. It was adopted in 1946. So this is about, history is about gender, it's about power, it's about identity, and it's a matter of democracy. It's about values. So what are we going to do about that? What is the Museum of Women's History going to do? Are we going to add women and stir? Yes. That is actually what we're going to do. That's one way of dealing with this democratic dilemma. We are going to talk about women of power because there were several before the 1800s, that is. We are going to talk about women warriors, women politicians, queens, thinkers. We are going to talk about women who were active in areas where women are considered as anomalies. We will also talk about the conditions of individual women, of their recollections and stories about their lives. We are going to point at all those experiences that are women, and also a women's version of male connotated stories, like, for example, the invasion in Normandy, 1944. There are several female stories never told. We are going to talk about experiences that are solely female. This is an image of the Boston Marathon in 1967. This woman was actually famous, world famous after this Boston Marathon. She was, as you can see, pushed. This person was trying to push her out of the race. All museums generate ideas, reinforce ideas and patterns of thinking and acting. And we, as a museum will work in a way that promotes gender equality. We know that in most places, most times, all over the world, women have not had the same opportunities and possibilities as men have had. And we know that women still don't have it. Gender and power is the biggest democratic problem of our time globally. So the Museum of Women's History wants to be involved in discussing the future, how a different distribution of power and possibilities is going to look like. Because patterns of thought, patterns of behavior, norms, ideals, they change, they shift, they alter all the time. That's what history tells us. And also, change is possible. That's what history tells us. So that is the reason why there is a Museum of Women's History, and this is the reason we want to break the silence that surrounds women in history. Thank you.